In this video I'm going to analyze one of the best DSLR cameras on the market, the top-of-the-line Nikon D850. But I'm going to analyze it under a very specific point of view, how it performs with time lapses. The D850 is often considered the best DSLR for time lapses on the market. So, if you are a time-lapse hero, stay tuned. I hesitated for quite a while between the Nikon D850 and the mirrorless one, the Sony 7R3. So, from time to time, I will be comparing them during this review. The D850 is relatively heavy at over 900 grams, but it is very nice to handle. It has a very good grip. It is sealed against dust and moisture and gives the impression to be built like a tank, with a magnesium alloy frame. The autofocus system has 153 points, of which 99 cross-type, basically the same as the flagship D5, considered one of the best on the market. It has a burst rate of 7 frames per second, which can be expanded to 9 with the optional battery grip. But in this video I prefer to concentrate on features specifically important for time lapses. First of all, resolution. The D850 has a new back-illuminated CMOS sensor, allowing a staggering resolution of 45.7 megapixels. In spite of the huge resolution, the new technology of the sensor allows for incredible detail and an image quality competing with medium format cameras. As you can see, the results in terms of time-lapse quality are very impressive. It is of course very important to use top-performing lenses, as with this level of detail, any lack of sharpness or other shortcoming in the lenses will be immediately evident. The resolution is 8256 by 5504 pixels and far exceed the 7680 by 4320 of the standard UHD 8K. This is handy as it allows room for choosing the desired framing and cropping, even for 8K time lapses. I always encode my time lapses in 4K, which is 3840 by 2160, so there is a huge room for stabilizing and rotating, especially when post-processing hyperlapses. But also for extremely deep zoom in or out, or for panning or tilting. All sort of movement can be created in post-production without heavy loss of quality, giving space to plenty of creativity. Note that accurate focus is extremely important with such high resolution. I suggest to focus on a magnified portion of the image in live view. The excellent LCD screen has now a focus picking functionality, which helps a lot. I occasionally ruined a few time lapses for being lazy in focusing. Also, the least amount of camera shake can totally ruin the end result. You can see here a couple of occasions where I was of course using a tripod, but strong wind or wobbly ground introduced an acceptable amount of camera shake. In time lapses you generally want to use a slow shutter speed to get the correct amount of motion blur, but in case of strong winds or unstable ground, it is better to go for a bit faster shutter speed, just to be safe. What really astonished me with this camera is the amount of achievable dynamic range, which is announced as a whopping 14.8 stops. The ability to recover shadows in underexposed situations is beyond belief. And it's even possible to recover up to a couple of stops of overexposed highlights. I'm showing you here a series of time-lapse with extreme dynamic range, And as you can see, the D850 handles them beautifully. When I first bought it, I did a series of tests. I shot this day to nighttime lapse, keeping the same exposure values throughout, to see how much detail I could extract by extremely underexposed shadows. Of course, this is not at all the best way to shoot this sort of time lapses. In real life, I would be constantly ramping exposure. I have made 3 tutorials about how to shoot day to night time lapses. I will post a link at the end of this video. I was astonished to see that the resulting time-lapse could be almost usable in its entirety, although of course not perfect. If we analyze some frames taken at different points in the time-lapses, you can see that the ability to recover shadows is beyond belief. In the final frames, the unprocessed image is practically pitch black, and we can still recover some info. Let's have a look now at slightly overexposed images, where we can recover a bit of highlights. But of course, when shooting time lapses with this camera, the best way to go is exposing to the right, leaving a bit of room erring toward the left. This is useful, for example, if while shooting the time lapse the sun might come out from the clouds. The ability of the D850 to recover shadows makes sure that we get it right practically every time. The D850 has a base ISO of 64, which is 2/3 of a stop better than most DSLR, including the Sony. And this for time lapses is very good. It also has an extended minimum ISO of 32, without any quality loss. Excellent news! I had done a time-lapse test where I constantly keep ramping up ISO from the minimum up to an insane ISO 8000. Going through the images, we can see that the first hint of noise starts appearing at around ISO 600, and it gets very noticeable above 1600. When dealing with still images, getting rid of a certain amount of noise is very easy, but in time-lapse things are much more complex. I use Lightroom for all my raw color grading, and I must admit that Lightroom the noise rate is really bad. I much prefer to use the excellent Nikon D850, but it only works at TIFF or JPEG level, and to use it for 300 or more images needed for a time-lapse, it is possible, but extremely tedious and time-consuming. So I tend to stay within ISO 400 for my time-lapses, and I must say that I don't really need to go any higher than that. I generally use the ISO range from 32 to 400, which gives me almost 4 stop of completely noise-free dynamic range. This allows me to carry just one single ND filter, either a 200 or a 400, for each lens, which makes life much easier. I can then adjust ISO to get the needed exposure. The ability to go down to ISO 32 is another extremely strong point for the D850. The D850 has now a tilting touchscreen, which is excellent news. It does not rotate, so it cannot be used for portrait orientation, but that's not a problem, as in time-lapse we are always using landscape mode anyway. It is a very generous 2.36 m.dot LCD, very bright, and has plenty of touch functionalities. Battery life is also very good, as can be expected from a DSLR. I have noticed that I can shoot about 2000 still images with a fully charged battery. Certainly better than the Sony. Battery life also depends on the use of the LCD screen. but when shooting time-lapses the screen is not available, as we will see later. This is again an excellent feature, as with time-lapses we tend to shoot a lot of stills. I only carry 2 full batteries, and so far I never needed more. Also, having a battery fail during a time-lapse is extremely frustrating. The D850 has a built-in intervalometer, and a good one, while the Sony, for whatever reason, doesn't have one. There are 2 different functionalities for time-lapses, but the one for us time-lapse heroes is the one labeled Interval Time Shooting in the photo shooting menu. It is possible to shoot at half-second interval, which can be useful, but require a very fast memory card. It is better to set exposure smoothing on. If silent shooting is on, the camera will shoot without any noise, and also there will be no wear on the mechanic shutter. So it is better to use it for any time-lapse with static point of view. But one thing to consider is that it will be impossible in this mode to use the viewfinder or the LCD screen. The time-lapse will be completely blind, so this mode, for obvious reasons, is not suitable for hyperlapses. Finally, is it possible to set it to create a new folder for each individual time-lapse, if you so wish. There are 2 slots for memory card, one for traditional SD, and UHS-2 is supported, and another for the recent, faster XQD. So far, we've only seen exceptional performance and features. But unfortunately there are also a few drawbacks for time-lapse user, due not so much to the D850 itself, but to the specific design of the SLR cameras versus mirrorless. First of all, when shooting time-lapses, it is not possible to visualize the LCD screen. This is almost a deal breaker for time-lapse users. When shooting regular time-lapses with variation of light, especially sunrises or sunset, it is extremely useful to be able to visualize the exposure and the histogram, to adjust the light accordingly. Sadly, with the D850 I can only rely on the exposure meter, which get easily fooled in day-to-night transition, and when using ND filters. Luckily, the D850 has such an incredible ability to recover shadows that there is a considerable amount of underexposure to play with. Now, situations like crowded locations or places where a tripod is not allowed, I have to shoot time-lapses holding the camera on top of the tripod, well above my head, or at waist height. In these situations it is almost impossible to shoot correctly without visualizing the screen. The same applies for hyperlapses. Live view time-lapses shooting is a gigantic advantage for mirrorless cameras compared to the SRL. The viewfinder has a magnification of 0.75, the largest of any Nikon, but it is not an electronic viewfinder, which means that it doesn't offer a preview of white balance, exposure, and depth of field. Since the viewfinder is the only way we can visualize what we are shooting during a time-lapse, this is again an area where mirrorless camera hold a great advantage. In situations of low light or when using an ND filter, I often find myself shooting almost blindly. Finally, when using the viewfinder, there isn't much that can be added in terms of overlay, not even a rule of third grid, or 2 adjustable lines, which are generally available in mirrorless cameras. At first I felt really frustrated when shooting hyperlapses, but then I managed to get a bit better organized. I will soon publish a series of videos about technique for hyperlapses, so I would recommend to subscribe to my channel, so that you will not miss them. Come aboard! Let me show you quickly how I organize the viewfinder for hyperlapses. I set the autofocus for single point by using the autofocus button and the forward dial. I can then move the point around using the joystick. I place the point on a part of the image that will remain in the center of the frame throughout the hyperlapse. Then in camera settings I choose D9, viewfinder grid display. It only helps partially as it doesn't cover the center of the screen. Finally, I go to F1, Custom Control Assignment. I choose one function button, and I assign viewfinder virtual horizon, so I will have a level at the bottom and the side of the viewfinder that will help keep the camera horizontal. The choice of lenses for Nikon FX cameras is huge. It is an area where the Sony cannot really compete. This is the factor that sealed my choice for the D850. Here are 3 quick examples of lentil perfectly suited for time lapses and not available on the Sony. I needed a good wide-angle zoom that can fit filter with image stabilization and not too heavy. I do not care for a very wide aperture, and I found the excellent Nikon 16-35 f4. The Nikon 50 f1.8 is a very good nifty 50, incredibly small and really cheap. It can be had second-hand for around $100. I needed a telephoto lens, again not expensive and not heavy. And for time-lapses I don't really care about autofocus. The Samyang 135 f2 is extremely sharp, weighs only 800 grams and costs around $400. Rock and roll! Well, in certain areas now mirrorless camera supports new features that are really useful for time-lapses, and even more for hyperlapses. But in my opinion, the D850 at the moment is the best camera for time-lapses due to its resolution, dynamic range, ISO performance and choice of lenses. I suggest you to subscribe to my channel for tutorials about time-lapses, Photoshop, Lightroom, drones and many more things. We have a great fun here. If you wanna watch some of my previous videos about day-to-night time-lapses, you will find link on screen. Bye for now.